Thanks everyone for coming. This is domain-wide domination, creative paths from GCP to complete domain compromise. We're going to be touching on domain-wide delegation. Show of hands, has anyone heard of or seen domain-wide delegation in an environment before? Okay, so let's jump into it. So before that, a brief introductory slide. Who am I? My name is Walter Gordillo, not spam on GitHub. I'm a lead security engineer on the red team at Praetorian. I've been a pen tester / red teamer for a little over 5 years and a cyber practitioner for a little over 8 years. I started my career out in the SOC and then moved into digital forensics, and then shortly after made the switch to offensive security. I'm also the author of Delapone, which is the tool that we're going to be talking about that was written, it was inspired by some red teams that were successful red teams from finding domain-wide delegation. And so we'll talk about a little bit about that tool itself. So on the agenda for today, we'll do a mini deep dive into understanding domain-wide delegation, like what it is, why it even exists, what are some use cases for it, and then we'll introduce Delapone. So the tool meant to abuse or find domain-wide delegation settings, and then also abuse those permissions. And then I have 2 case studies for you guys. So case study number 1 is doing some drive scope data mining. So this is finding domain-wide delegation enabled for the drive OAuth scope, and how we did some data mining to compromise the environment. And then the second case study will be us finding the calendar scope enabled in an environment that almost led to a full compromise. So some pretty cool case studies to touch on there. And then we'll follow on with mitigation and detection strategies, and then we'll lead into Q&A. So understanding domain-wide delegation. So what is it, right? So in a nutshell, it essentially is a setting in Google Workspace that allows you a service account to impersonate users in Google Workspace, depending on the OAuth scope that you give it. And so it is very permissive. It's typically used in 2 different ways. So service account authorization, so letting internal tools act on behalf of users. Let's say you have some kind of automation workflow, you want your service account to do something automatically. Domain-wide delegation is a solution for that. And we'll visit some use cases that a company would normally have in the next slide. But you also would use it for OAuth client app approval. So you would allow a third-party app to access user data without prompting users for consent. And if you're thinking about that, maybe some red flags are coming up now at this point. You're like, that sounds pretty bad, and yes, it can be. So we'll show you how exactly. So why would an organization use domain-wide delegation if it is can be dangerous? Essentially, automation at scale without requiring user consent. So we have a couple scenarios here, a couple use cases. Let's say you have a service account that's backed that a GCP app uses. Let's say you have some kind of calendar management need, right? Let's say based on some trigger, you need to have an automatic calendar event written to some user's calendar. Domain-wide delegation is a solution to that problem. You can take that service account, impersonate that user, and then organize an event on their calendar automatically. And another use case is internal workflow automation. And so this is something that I actually saw in an organization while doing a red team. They had a Google Sheet that you input data into, and the service account would download that Google Sheet, parse it, and it would feed it into its automation flow to accomplish something on the back end. And so that's also something that we've seen in real life. And then lastly, user onboarding tasks. So let's say you have new users in your environment that you need to onboard, right? And maybe they have a starting point in Google Drive, and you want to upload documents and onboarding documents, employee handbooks to their Google Drive, just so that when they finally log in, they're able to access it. Again, domain-wide delegation is a solution to those issues, and so this is why an organization would use it. So how do you even set up domain-wide delegation, right? Like where does it even exist? How do you find it? So an admin needs to enable a service account for domain-wide delegation from Google Workspace. So this is a setting that only an admin can access from the Google Workspace admin portal. So if you go into the portal, into security, API controls, you'll find the setting for domain-wide delegation, and that's that box that's highlighted there. And then if you click Add New, you're presented with the screenshot here on the right where you can add a new client ID, and that client ID is just the service account ID that you get from GCP. And then you specify your scopes, right? So if we think about domain-wide delegation, you have to give it some scopes to access. You can think of those scopes like resources. So if you enable a service account for domain-wide delegation, you need to tell it where and what it can actually access. So for example, let's say you wanted to access Google Drive for whatever reason. You would enable that service account, and you would, right here, you would specify the drive OAuth scope. And so that service account can then can access that drive, but the caveat is that it can impersonate any user to access that drive. And that's really where the dangers of using this setting is. So how does it work under the hood? This is a very high-level overview of like how it works, oversimplified completely. If you want to dig deeper into more details, I highly recommend you read this white paper here by Hunter Security. They go into incredible detail on how you would enumerate or how it works under the hood, like how you would detect it and mitigate it and all that. So definitely recommend checking that out, and their tool DelaFriend, which is very good. Also inspired by this tool was inspired by DelaFriend as well. So under the hood, how does it work? So essentially, you're making a call to the Google Auth API, and what you're doing is you're creating a JWT and you're signing it with the private key of the service account. So again, it's a setting that's enabled for a service account, so you need to use that service account. You would sign the JWT with the private key of that account, and you would include a little bit more data into it. I'm not sure if you can read that, but the three main pieces of data that you do need to include are the name of the service account, so the account that is authorized for domain-wide delegation, who you're impersonating, right? So it's not called impersonating, it's actually, I think it's called subject, but for the sake of clarity, we'll say impersonating, right? Who you want to act on behalf of. And then lastly, the OAuth scope. So you need to know the OAuth scope that was actually granted to the service account. So you can't just add arbitrary OAuth scopes and expect it to work. It needs to be the exact OAuth scope that was configured in the setting. So once you have that, you sign it with the private key. You send it over to the Google Auth 2.0 service as you normally would interact with the service programmatically. And you get an access key if it's correct, and you get an error if it's not. So depending on the error, you can be a 403, 404 error. Or you get a valid access key that you can then use to continue accessing whatever resource you have access to, again, while impersonating anyone. So from an offensive security perspective, we're not going to be able to log on to the Google Workspace admin portal to figure out what was granted to the service account, right? We're normally starting out as a low privilege user that we can't really see what's going on in the environment, so we have to take a different approach to enumerating these OAuth scopes. The first thing that you can do, or actually, since the JWT is comprised of the OAuth scope, we can just substitute the OAuth scope with one that we'd like to test validity for. And so this is a brute force method. What we're doing is that instead of, we're still signing the JWT, but instead of passing just one OAuth scope, we are passing one OAuth scope at a time, but we're making that call iteratively through all of the OAuth scopes that exist. And we're just hammering that API call until something returns valid. And so that's how we enumerate the OAuth scopes, and ultimately how we find that domain-wide delegation is enabled for that service account. And there are approximately 374 unique OAuth scopes that are documented by Google. If you go into the developers.google.com link that I referenced here, you can see all the scopes that are available to you. But that's essentially the process of enumerating through it. Just kind of brute force, send it over one after the other until something sticks. So introducing Delapone. What is Delapone? Like I mentioned, this tool was inspired by some successful red teams that we've done at Praetorian. It's designed to identify and abuse domain-wide delegation in GCP and Google Workspace. It can enumerate service accounts for domain-wide delegation, and it also supports exploitation of the following scopes. So if you find a service account that's enabled for domain-wide delegation with the following scopes that you see here, so drive, calendar, admin, directory, user, and mail, you can use Delapone to complete that attack chain and see how you can use that to, or just move laterally, whatever, compromise credentials, find sensitive data, whatever it is. So This tool was designed to do that. And this is also a growing list. As we see domain-wide delegation more and more, I plan to add on additional modules that you can use to compromise the environment or move into social engineering tactics. It's a very creative approach because not all the time do you get access to like Google Drive, right? And you see something, you find sensitive files. Actually, one of the case studies will show how even though we have access to Google Calendar, we're still able to almost compromise the domain through social engineering. This is a feature overview. Won't spend too much time on this because this is also on the GitHub repo, but this is just an overview of what's available to you currently in the project. So you can enumerate all service accounts for domain-wide delegation. You have some Drive operations, calendar, admin operations, and Gmail operations. And so each one of these allow you to search through their respective resources in one way or another. The one that's pretty interesting that I don't cover too much here is the admin operations. In terms of TTPs, this is an excellent TTP for establishing persistence. If you find that it is enabled, you can create another Google Workspace admin, or you can just give yourself domain-wide delegation privileges to, to access Gmail or access their Google Drive or something like that. You don't necessarily need to reset a password or anything like that. So it is a very, very stealthy way to establish persistence in an environment that leverages GCP and domain-wide delegation. So the one we'll dive into is the enum, right? Because that's sort of the starting point. If you find a service account key, you want to test it to see if it has domain-wide delegation enabled. So how do you run it? How do you set it up? The way that you would do it is you do delepone enum. You can see that right there. There are a couple prerequisites that you need to establish. So to set it up, you either need the GCP bearer access token environment variable set. You can get that from the gcloud CLI. You authenticate with the gcloud CLI, as we see here, and you do a gcloud auth print access token. That'll give you that access token. Just pop that into an environment variable on your terminal, and you're good to go. Or you can use a service account's private key to do the same thing. So if you find a service account key, and I'm sure if anyone's a pen tester and has looked through file shares or anything like that, you've probably found a Google private key lying around. You can actually use that to test for domain-wide delegation as well. So those are the two prerequisites to running the enumeration module. And then, so what happens after you run it, right? So this screenshot here shows the first two points that we see here of what's happening. So first, it enumerates the service account details and the privileges. So it'll go through all of the projects. It'll tell you what service account is being used, the ID, and also the roles that you have over that project. And that's important because if you find additional projects that you can, that you're the owner or editor for, you can look into those projects as well and look for domain-wide delegation in service accounts. So you can see how this starts to, you recursively start to look through projects looking for that setting. So this is what's happening here. It's also creating a local copy of service account private keys. That needs to happen because it needs to sign the JWT with the private key, right? So you need to create a local copy of the service account's private key to then use the exploitation scripts. So the neat thing about this is that it will, even though it'll create those keys that might leave some kind of IOC, but it will download it locally, and if it determines that it's not enabled for domain-wide delegation, it'll remove those keys locally, and it'll also remove it from the actual GCP page. So it does a little bit of cleanup as well. So then this is so the second part of the execution, and this is the meat and potatoes. This is kind of what you're looking for if you're running this tool, is the results summary. So this is when it starts brute forcing every single OAuth scope to find domain-wide delegation. If you look above the red rectangle, you can see the progress bar has finished. And I'm not sure if you can see that, but it says 730 out of 730. The caveat to using this tool is that it can take a little bit of time. This is my test environment. I only had 2 service accounts, but we're testing against 374 or so OAuth scopes. So it can take a little bit of time to brute force through all of it. And you can also reduce the scopes if you're not interested in some of them. Like I know some of the scopes are like related to YouTube. If you're really not interested in those, you can remove those and really like just check for the ones you're interested in. But it'll iterate through that, and then it'll output the results. So it'll tell you what service accounts were enabled for domain-wide delegation, and it'll also give you the authorized scopes. So this is what you'd be looking for. It'll give you the scope that it's authorized for, and then a brief description right under it, so you know what you can do with that. And then after here is that cleanup that I mentioned. So cleaning up service account keys, and then a quick summary of like how many keys were processed and all that. So some of the exploitation modules, I won't dive too deep into them, but just some examples of what you can do with, if you find that the right scopes are granted to the service account. If you're looking at the admin module, right, you can run Delapone admin, pass it the flags. You can either elevate yourself or create a whole new Google Workspace admin. So this is that persistence technique that I was talking about. And as I'll go into the later slides of detection and mitigation strategies, you'll see that it is pretty difficult to kind of backtrack and attribute this activity to domain-wide delegation, because you're not really compromising credentials. You're not really authenticating to someone's account. You're actually impersonating them with a service account. So it's a little harder to attribute this when the security team is doing something like forensics and trying to rebuild the timeline of what happened. So you can elevate or create a new Google Workspace admin. You can also list all the files within Drive, right? So if you have the Drive scope, you have unfettered access to Google Drive. So you can list out all of the files within someone's Google Drive, and then you can take it a step further, which I'll talk about in one of the case studies. So for now, you can list all the files within the Drive. This is actually the first thing that I did when I encountered this. I just listed out all the files, and this is outputted as a CSV, so just opened it in Excel, and I looked through the interesting files. So like I was looking for anything that said secret, anything that said credentials, looking for AWS credentials. So that's a method that you can do, like just quickly see like what is available to you. And then you can enumerate interesting emails. So if you have the Gmail scope added, then you can look through all of their emails, impersonate them, look through all of their emails, and then look for specific keywords. So in this case, I'm looking through Holloway@spamsec.pro's email. So I'm listing out all his emails within a certain date range, and then I'm looking for a keyword, secret or something like that, and it'll find that. So these are some examples that you can do if you find domain-wide delegation for these scopes. Again, this is a growing list, so my hope is to continue building into this as you encounter more and more scopes. So any questions? I know there was a lot for domain-wide delegation. I probably said it like 100 times now. But any questions before we dive into the case studies? Yeah.
Can you actually download that secret.txt file
Yeah.
using this tool too?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's part of the module.
Cool.
Yeah.
Like surely all those like OAuth requests are getting logged, right?
The OAuth requests are getting logged, but they're getting logged not as like domain-wide delegation is using this API call. They're getting logged as an API call. Nice. So that's why I mentioned it's a little tougher to figure out like what actually is happening. Okay. And I have an example of that in one of the case studies as well. But yeah. So to set the stage for this red team, here's some background, right? It was an assumed breach red team. So this was a red team where we were provisioned an account as a developer. And being an assumed breach, we already had some kind of initial access. So in this case, it was a corporate laptop that we could access. We had access to the developer GCP environment, and this was because we were provisioned an account. The goal of the red team was to see if a developer can go from being a developer to another very sensitive, it should be like separated area of the organization. And so we started as a very low privileged developer, and we had access to a GCP, sandbox GCP environment, the developer GCP environment. The first flag that we found, first red flag, was that we confirmed that our role had the IAM service account keys.create permission. And for this scenario, it wasn't that concerning to the client because again, it was a developer GCP account. Like you can think of it like a sandbox, right? So they didn't really care if our user could create service account keys. They didn't really see like the impact in that. Like, right, they could use the GCP environment as they needed to test things. So this was normal, quote unquote normal. The issue is later. But with our privileges to create service account keys, we just decided to check for domain-wide delegation that was enabled on service accounts. So since we had access to the service accounts, why not check for domain-wide delegation, right? And that's when we found our second flag. Domain-wide delegation was enabled for the Google Drive OAuth scope. And so this will be one of the key takeaways here, is that even though it's a developer sandbox environment, domain-wide delegation doesn't really care that it's a sandbox environment. It's going to work the same way. It doesn't really have a sandbox and production boundary. And so that's something that we called out to the client as just like a design flaw. So now we started crafting the exploit. And if you take a look at the code on the right, this is how we would start making that JWT, right? So we have the key, the service account private key that we've downloaded with the enum module, and that we're eventually going to sign the JWT with. We have the correct scope that we've already enumerated. We have the delegated admin here, which is the admin that we're going to impersonate, or the user we're going to impersonate. In this case, it's admin, of course. And then what we decided to do, since we saw this, is we decided to share all the files with ourselves. So since we had, you asked if you could download the file. Yes, you could download the file. You can do anything, including share files with someone else. So we decided to take all the files in specific people's Google Drive and then share them with our own user. And so this was, you go back and forth about the IOCs and like the potential risks of doing this. What they see is that what they see on their end is their file just being shared with another user. When we thought about it and went back and forth about it, we were just like, it's probably like if I were in that position, I would assume that I made a mistake somewhere, and I probably granted this person access to a folder, top level folder that was then inherited down or something like that. And so it was an accepted risk that we took because we felt like the user would just kind of brush it off if they did see it, but they never actually saw it. So we shared it with ourselves. And then that actually led to a whole like treasure trove of good stuff. So not only did we impersonate the admin, we impersonated everyone on the security team, the IT team, the HR team, anyone that we thought could have information that would let us that would allow us to achieve the engagement objectives. And so this is what we ended up seeing. We can see we're logged in as not the admin, right? This is our provisioned account. But if you look at the shared with me tab, you'll see shared by admin, 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 and these are all of their files in their Google Drive. And so from here we have pretty much access to all of that sensitive info that they would inevitably upload to their drive because everybody does it. So did that for a large number of users, and then we just went treasure hunting. We used the Google Drive search bar to look for things like AWS Access Key ID, find AWS credentials, find interesting things like key or files with the word password or credentials or anything like that. Anything that we think would lead us to like privilege escalation. And so we did this. There is a limitation on this, and so we took it one step further. The Drive search bar can only take you so far. It can't look through like script files, and so we noticed there were a large number of bat files that were uploaded to Google Drive, and so we couldn't search the contents of that just because the Drive search bar wouldn't let us. And so we opted to use our clone to mount the drive locally, and I didn't know you could do this before this, but you can actually mount your Google Drive locally and then scan it for secrets using a secret scanner. In this case, Nosy Parker. If you're not familiar with Nosy Parker, I know I'm biased saying this, but I actually mean it. I think it's one of the best secret scanning tools out there. We used that and ran it straight through the mounted drive, and we found an insane amount of secrets. So Okta admin API keys, I will caveat that these were expired. We were just a little bit too late. Had we been in the environment maybe like 6 months before, those keys were going to be valid. So we didn't get to use them, but we did achieve the engagement objectives with that second one. So a Google Sheet of an employee containing plain text credentials to sensitive accounts. One of our goals was to compromise a SaaS resource, and this HR employee actually had credentials uploaded to Google Sheets, and that's where they were storing. That's what they were using as a password manager, essentially. So now we began to notice this was a systemic problem, and so this was something that we eventually, at the end of it, we kind of called out to the organization that, hey, users are uploading very sensitive things to Google Drive. You're not really using like a password manager or anything like that. So definitely something that needs to be taken a look at throughout the environment. And so we also found company bank account credentials, which is crazy, and they were valid. I did validate those. And many instances of domain credentials stored in those script files. So those bat files that I was talking about, Nosy Parker was able to go in and find all those passwords in script files, which is really cool because it, additional paths to move laterally through the environment. And then we found so many more things. We found that users were using Drive as their personal backup storage for their computers, and so we found backups of file systems uploaded to Google Drive. So very, very fruitful, this attack path. Some of the key takeaways here from this case study, even in a developer environment, we do not make service accounts with domain-wide delegation accessible to users. So I mentioned this before, even though it was a sandbox environment, they didn't really care if we escalated privileges in that GCP project. There was domain-wide delegation enabled in that same project, which turned it immediately into a critical asset. So even if you don't think that project is sensitive, don't allow service accounts with DWD within that project. If it is enabled, it's likely that the company heavily relies on Google Workspace resources. So this is something that I actually grappled with in the beginning of the red team. I was kind of going back and forth on whether or not it's fruitful to continue looking for things in Google Drive or pivot somewhere else. And then after kind of connecting the dots, if this company is using a lot of automation workflows with domain-wide delegation, it's very likely that they're relying on Google Drive and other Google resources to accomplish day-to-day operations. And so that's kind of when I decided to just full-on focus on finding something good within Google Drive, and that's what ultimately led through the iterative process of looking for secrets. So another key takeaway: don't provision users with permissions to create keys for service accounts. This is more like a general GCP IAM recommendation. Don't just let any user create keys for service accounts if it's not necessary. Again, in this scenario, it was a developer environment, so not too crazy, but in general, just shouldn't be by default allowed, because something like this can happen. Any questions before we go into case study number 2? Okay. I'll jump into this one. So as a reminder, we didn't get full domain compromise with this case study, but it is still very interesting for a couple reasons. So this one was a full scope red team. So meaning we're starting as an external attacker. We needed to breach the perimeter and get inside somehow. So we ended up compromising an employee account. And while doing some internal reconnaissance, we ended up finding a service account key in a file share, just lying around. Even before I knew what domain-wide delegation was, I've seen Google accounts or Google private keys for service accounts lying all over the place before. So definitely something that every time I find now, just a reminder to take a look at. So that's our first red flag. Second red flag is that it was enabled for Google Calendar. So now it was enabled for Google Calendar, right? What does that mean? Again, unfettered access to anyone's Google Calendar. So in the beginning, when I found this, I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to find anything interesting, like who stores secrets in Google Calendar or Google Events, right? But we took a different approach to looking for secrets. We actually took a social engineering approach, and we tried to social engineer internally. So if you take a look at this screenshot here, this is how we start building that JWT. Take that service account private key, give it the right scope, tell it who we want to impersonate, and then build the credentials object that we send over to the API. So what do we do? What do we do to then compromise or almost compromise the environment? We took the social engineering approach, right? So we tried to identify what normal meant in the environment. Again, we have access to anyone's Google Calendar. And then we also created malicious events in attempts to capture credentials and gain code execution. So the way that we did that was in two different attempts. Did I go back? Oh yeah, no. So first, understanding the environment. Here you can see in this screenshot here, you can see we're using Delapone to dump all of the events of someone's calendar. So we just impersonated them and then just listed out all of their Google Calendar events, like what they had on their calendar. And then we started looking to see like what was recurring, what was a potential entry point. We saw things like IT stand-up meetings. We saw like one-on-ones with other employees, obviously focus times and random stuff. But something that what we thought was a good opportunity was the DevOps engineer interview. The reason why we went after that one is because that was between an internal employee and then an external account. And so we thought that might give us the best chance to at least compromise the internal employee, because we're going to use a credential capture page. The external employee is not going to be able to log into the fake Okta portal, for example. And so with Delapone, we can dump all of these calendar events. We can drill into each one of these, and so this is what you see here. We can dump just the details, like the description and all that, and get a sense of what the wording looks like. Right? This was organized by an HR individual who used specific wording and who used a very formatted way to schedule interviews. So then, the approach that we took was we wanted to modify that calendar event. So instead of, so we wanted to modify that calendar invite. So we wanted to just make a couple changes here. So what we included was the malicious link in the location field, and also an injected pretext. So what this looked like before was a link to Greenhouse, where the interviewer, so the person that we're trying to, the person within the company that we're trying to phish, is prompted to, or they're directed to Greenhouse to download the candidate's resume. So the injected pretext in this case, we modified that and changed it to, this applicant has not yet been processed in Greenhouse. Please view Dan's resume in the location meeting attached. And so this was a way to try and trick that person into, instead of going to Greenhouse to pull their resume, go into this link and go through the Okta portal page to retrieve that resume. This didn't work. Spoiler alert, it actually led to an investigation. But we didn't get burned. And for the reason of, it's difficult to track this if you don't know what's going on, if you don't know that you can do this with domain-wide delegation. So this was, talking to the POC for the red team, we knew that an investigation was underway. Like they thought there was an account compromise, but really couldn't identify the source of it. Again, we're using a service account to just impersonate someone inside the domain, so we're not really authenticating on their behalf or anything like that, or we're not making the authentication with their plain text credentials or something like that. We're just impersonating them, leveraging a valid technique. So this is what we did. Didn't work. It actually got caught because I think they reported they saw that sketchy link and they reported it. That led to an investigation. We quickly, had to regroup and pivot and figure out what we're going to do next. This was obviously a time box engagement. If this was like a real threat actor, you could probably sit on this for a couple months, right, and wait until things cool down and then do something else. But we just jumped into a second attempt. So instead of impersonating the HR or someone from the HR team scheduling an interview, we decided to impersonate a member of the IT team to then schedule this placeholder invite on the HR person's calendar. So this looks like it's coming from someone on the IT team, and the pretext is, placeholder mandatory box update reminder. So you can create this, you can create all of this and use it programmatically. And if you look at the Delapone repo, I have some examples and some YAML files of how you can use that to fill in all of these fields with whatever you want. So this is what we ended up using. So this was this ruse was, in order to ensure you're on the most secure and stable version of Box, please download the latest Box client from our portal with a hyperlink in there. And so this was designed to get them to click on there, feel like they need to update their Box client, because this was clearly sent from the IT team. This wasn't like a an email that looked like the IT person's email. This was legitimately their email. Again, this is like all super, it looks legit, right? And so this was the ruse that we used to try and move laterally. But I think at that point, everyone had like a heightened security awareness at that point. They knew an investigation was going on. So this didn't work either. But it was a pretty cool case study, because again, they never attributed it to us. We never got evicted from the environment, and they never knew that we were the ones behind it. They just knew something was up, and who knows? Eventually, maybe they would have just closed it as a false positive, or maybe they would have found that they had domain-wide delegation. That's the best case scenario, honestly. So yeah, that was the second case study in what we did. So some of the key takeaways from there. Even with seemingly benign, seemingly harmless scopes, domain-wide delegation's architecture, which enables impersonation of any user, poses a significant security risk. So even if you don't have something that will lead you to sensitive files like Google Drive, right? Even if you think you have something harmless like Calendar, because you can impersonate anyone's account and it gives you pretty much unfettered access, it can be very dangerous. It doesn't look like it's coming from a service account. It looks like it's coming from legitimately whoever you're impersonating. And so that's the design flaw behind domain-wide delegation, is that impersonation aspect to it. If DWD does not grant access to sensitive resources, pivot to internal social engineering. So this is what we did for the second case study. We didn't really have access to anything sensitive, so we just decided to pivot to social engineering and try to compromise credentials and move laterally. So this obviously applies on a red team, right? If you're on a pen test, maybe don't do that, especially if social engineering is out of scope. So don't take that advice. But it's still, if you're on a pen test and you find it, definitely report it, because this is something that can happen from that. And so they should be at least made aware of the severity of using it. And the last key takeaway, it can be difficult to get to the root of a domain-wide delegation compromise. This is something that we saw here. It took them a long time to, it didn't take them long to respond, but it took them a long time to really understand what was going on. I think we finished the engagement before they figured out what was going on. So leverage that to your advantage if you're a red teamer. So some of the mitigation and strategies. So first, mitigations and minimizing exposure, right? If you need to use domain-wide delegation, try not to, but only use it when it's absolutely necessary, but again, preferably never. There are other alternatives. Yeah.
Is there any way to use domain-wide delegation in a safer manner?
Do you have another part?
No, that's it.
In a safer manner, yes. And it's this point right here. So yes, I'll skip to that one. So avoid using broad scopes like Drive or Mail or mail.google.com. There are a little more narrower scopes that, for example, drive.file only allows you to access a specific file in Google Drive. But the fact that you can impersonate anyone doesn't change. So there still is a little bit of a risk, but it minimizes exposure because it only allows you to access that file. You can think of a scenario where, okay, you impersonate an admin and write to the file or something like that, and mess with the whatever workflow they have. That's totally possible. And restrict access to projects with domain-wide delegation. Again, if you have a service account that needs to be enabled for domain-wide delegation, have a whole separate project for it. Don't bundle it with projects that users access a lot. treat that as a critical asset and a protected asset elsewhere, and give the proper access controls to whoever needs to use it. And if you don't take my word for it, hopefully you'll take Google's word for it. This is a screenshot straight from the support.google.com website where they advise, and I'll read it out if you can't see it. It's recommended that you avoid using domain-wide delegation if possible. If you do need to use domain-wide delegation, proceed with caution and read through the best practices. So if you don't take my word for it, hopefully you'll take Google's word for it. It's a design flaw essentially because of that impersonation feature. Yes.
Can you limit the impersonation to a specific subset of users?
Not that I know of. Yeah, not that I know of. Yeah. Detection strategies. So I talked a little bit about this and how tough it can be to kind of recreate that timeline. You have to look through two different logs to sort of figure it out. So the first one is actually a pretty good detection. So in the Google Workspace audit logs, you can detect on the authorized API client access event. That'll show the grant of domain-wide delegation. So that'll show the first time that it was actually enabled for a service account. It is good because let's say you never granted domain-wide delegation to anyone or to any service account, and then suddenly you see it 2 weeks ago, you know that something might be up. But it's not foolproof in that it could already exist and you just gained access to the service account that was already enabled. That won't really help you. If you look at the GCP audit logs, you can check for a large amount of service account key creations in a short amount of time. So that's an IOC of Delapone. Right? The enum feature does that brute forcing, and it also downloads all of the private keys of the service accounts. So that's going to do that, programmatically in a really quick fashion in a short amount of time. And so that's a potential IOC. You can definitely check for the large amount of service account key creations. And then finally, Google Workspace audit logs. Check the IP address that initiated the call. So I think someone might have asked about this. If you can see the calls, yeah, you can see the calls being made, and you can also see the IP addresses. And this will work in an environment that is not using like programmatic access for whatever reason or automation. There shouldn't be that many API calls being made, but if there is, it makes it a little tougher. Again, this was also an assumed breach, so we had an internal IP. We could have still, figured out who it was exactly, but with a large amount of IPs and no way to really correlate the two, right? Like what's using domain-wide delegation? How do you know for sure? So it's definitely something that that can go wrong, or that just hinders forensics on it. And if we think about domain-wide delegation as a whole, right? We always know about the principle of security over convenience. In this case, if you think about it as a scale, you can see how domain-wide delegation tilts that scale over in favor of convenience, and then at the expense of security. So definitely does, allows you to do some really cool and convenient things like automation while impersonating anyone, but you do sacrifice some security while using that setting. So something to keep in mind of. And again, if you don't trust me, trust Google, advising you not to. So these are just like some of the main detection strategies. If you want a little bit more detail, they actually, these two blog posts go into a little more detail on what you can chain together and all that. So definitely check that out, the blog by Palo Alto Networks and also Hunter Security. They made the tool Delafriend, which Delapone, the enum module of Delapone, is pretty much like, I want to say like 95% of the Delafriend tool. The only thing that I changed was the output format and the fact that you can also enumerate using the service account's private key. So definitely check those out if you're interested in this topic.